Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. Tonight, he was a force to be reckoned with. In and out of the boxing ring. But did it cost him his life?
Eddie Melo was an amazing fighter.
I remember he hit me a hook and I thought, okay, I get it. This guy can punch.
I think the boxing world is very corrupt.
After his boxing career had finished, what was he doing for a living?
I'm not going to speculate on that.
The Hamilton mob guy said to Frank Catroni, put Melo on a leash or I'll kill him.
A lot of people say, well, you know, you shouldn't have got in trouble. I was a fighter. A lot of people want to try you on.
To find out that your parent who you loved the most not only died, but then you find out that he was murdered, and then you find out that it was for someone's paycheck, and then you find out that someone ordered it, I'm still trying to process.
A second arrest has been made in the double murder of Eduardo Melo and Joao Pavao.
It was not anything organized crime related. What it boils down to is the jealousy.
Here now is Mark Carcasole with Eddie Melo's final round.
Eddie Melo on the comeback trail.
Equal parts prize fighter, family man, celebrity, and tough guy. Eddie Melo's life was one full of contrasts. Some of those contrasts are celebrated, like the raging bull he was in the ring versus the teddy bear he was around his daughters. But outside of the home, much of it seemingly hidden from the eyes of his family and friends, the rise and fall of Eddie Melo is a heartbreaking story. Born in Portugal, Eddie Melo was raised in the Little Portugal neighborhood of Toronto. He took up boxing at a young age and quickly established himself through the 70s as an up-and-coming amateur. There was some talk he could be an Olympic prospect, but Eddie skipped that when he moved to Montreal, where the rules allowed him to go pro at just 17. It was there that he first got knocked head over heels.
I met Eddie in 1979. He had two different personas. There was the public persona and then there was the private persona. And I feel very privileged to have had the private persona where he could be himself and not have to put on airs or be the tough guy.
Moving back to Toronto, as in many other aspects of his life, Melo became a family man sooner than average.
Jessica was born shortly thereafter, and he was so happy to have this little bundle of joy, and she looked just like him. Like, she came out with a full head of black hair, and she looked exactly like her dad.
He was a big suck. We used to cuddle all the time. I never heard the word no. He was, just a fun, kind of goofy guy, and his world was his family.
My father with us, and especially with my sister and I, he was a very present parent. I knew from a young age that he was pure magic. So I never felt anything but love and joy and support and fun with my father.
Away from his family, boxing was Eddie's other focus, and he trained hard.
We lived one block away from his trainer, Travis, and if Eddie wasn't up with his army boots and weights and sweatsuit and going for a run at 5 in the morning, then Travis made sure that he did get up.
Too wide, too slow. Eddie Melo was an amazing fighter. It's unbelievable that a kid at 17, 18 years old could fight guys like Fernand Marcotte, Vinnie Curto, and going and beating them.
I respect my opponents, but in this case, I have no respect whatsoever for the man.
Fans and fellow boxers couldn't help but take notice, or should we say, be put on notice, like his friend Mike Griffin was in their first sparring session.
There was like, I don't know, it must have been 200 girls there, all with Je t'aime Eddie t-shirts on, and Eddie showed up, and he came out to all kinds of fanfare and music, and he kissed girls in the front row, and I couldn't believe this was a sparring session. I was like, who the hell is this guy? And I remember he hit me a hook in the shoulder, which was intended for my chin, but he hit me in the shoulder, and I thought, okay, I get it. This guy can punch.
His ferocity, his style of constant attack, earned Melo the nickname the Hurricane. And he made waves on the Canadian boxing circuit. The pinnacle of his career is widely believed to be his trilogy against Quebec boxer Fernand Marcotte Jr. 3 fights, all in increasingly large venues across Montreal.
Eddie was a superstar in Montreal. They loved him.
A superstar at the peak of his career. But by the time his boxing days were over, Melo's life had taken on a darker side, and that was about to catch up with him.
The last time I saw him in Vancouver, and I asked him how he was doing, I said, "Are you okay?" And he didn't answer. He just gave me a really big hug. And that was the last time I saw him.
On April 6th, 2001, outside the Amici Cafe in what was at the time a strip mall in Mississauga, a city just west of Toronto, Ontario, Eddie was seen talking to a longtime friend, Joao Pavao.
Police say Melo, who was sitting inside his wife's Jeep, and Pavao, who was standing outside, had been in the parking lot for 10 to 15 minutes before the killer shot them to death. The suspect then fled after hijacking a red Honda Civic from the lot.
Saw a dude run up beside that Jeep, shoot both guys, and take off.
And I just can't believe it. It's just unbelievable to me.
The phone call was extremely abrupt.
Who called you to notify you? Was it police?
That will remain confidential. It was not a family member.
Melo and Sine had split up by this point, and Sine was now living in BC. But the two kept in close contact, raising their kids together.
Someone called and literally just said the sentence, "Eddie is dead." And as a 14-year-old, I heard that. And my mom, I just kind of remember silence for a minute, and then just kind of chaos ensued.
I remember getting a phone call at work saying that I needed to come home to my mom's. And I thought it was really bizarre, and all I was told was that, you know, something had happened to my dad. I just kind of sat there and like tears streaming down my face. And I remember my mom getting on the phone and frantically trying to get me a flight out to Toronto.
I had no details other than what was available on the news, and it was horrifying.
The days that followed were full of questions and uncertainty for Eddie Melo's family, including his common-law wife, Rhonda Sullivan.
He said he was taking my Jeep to go to a Amici Cafe to meet his friend.
Just minutes after Melo and Pavao were gunned down, Rhonda got a call from a cousin who said she thought she'd seen her Jeep here at this parking lot. Sure enough, it was Eddie.
I was praying that he was at hospital. Something, that he was shot in the stomach or the leg or somewhere. I was just in shock.
Sullivan seemed to have her own theory as to what may have happened.
So who would do this to him?
I have no idea. Well, I do have an idea. I'm sure Eddie's had lots of enemies from way back when. I mean, once you have an enemy, they don't forget 5, 10 years down the road.
Coming up, Eddie Melo's murder has investigators taking a closer look at his past and his connections to the Montreal mob. In April 2001, former boxer Eddie Melo was shot and killed alongside his friend Joao Pavao. The shooter got away, and Melo's family wonders if it could be someone from Eddie's past. We now return to Mark Carcasole with Eddie Melo's final round.
I'm sure Eddie's had lots of enemies from way back when.
These so-called enemies that Eddie Melo had made, referred to by Rhonda Sullivan from, as she put it, way back when, were people his family and friends claim became jealous and intimidated as his status grew. And it had grown fast. Some worried a little too fast.
I always felt he was exploited in Montreal a little bit.
Eddie's downfall was it was his management. They threw him in every time they had a chance. They burnt him out.
I mean, I think he realized that he was kind of being used.
I think the boxing world is very corrupt. And back in the day when he was a young fighter, there was a lot of people that took advantage of him and started his career early and ended his career early. There were people that benefited greatly financially and publicly from having Eddie in their lives.
In 1986, at the age of just 25, after more than 40 professional bouts in a span of only 8 years, Eddie Melo had retired with a record of 32 wins, 9 losses, and 2 draws. Physically, Melo was still in great shape by all accounts, but mentally, the sport he once loved had clearly worn him out.
When the career ended, he did lose focus, and he was not sure of where he was going with his life.
Along the way, Melo had gained fans in some powerful places, most notably Frank Catroni.
Catroni was the youngest of 3 brothers who were heavily into organized crime. In the movie Goodfellas, there's a cooking scene in the prison. That's Catroni's one of the cooks. I think Catroni was a bit starstruck. I mean, he got out of prison and all of a sudden he's at the Montreal Forum watching this guy who everybody thinks is going to be world champion, and then he's meeting the guy, and Catroni, I think, saw him as a son.
While news coverage and insiders have repeatedly linked Melo to Catroni over the years, particularly in his post-boxing days, Melo's family and closest friends say he largely hid that part of his life from them.
I was not aware of those associations. Eddie was very, very private, and the only association I was made aware of was the boxing connection.
As far as you knew, after his boxing career had finished, what was he doing for a living? What was he doing for money?
I'm not going to speculate on that.
I never heard, to be honest, that he was working for him. And I wouldn't even necessarily say that that was a relationship. He wasn't employed by anybody. Maybe he was asked to do some things, but he would have to be asked. He was never told to do anything. So that would be, could you do this for me? I mean, there might be remuneration, but could you do this for me?
Yeah, I guess Eddie's role was almost like a bodyguard of sorts, and driver. We keep hearing driver too.
Yeah, I think it's on the high end of driver though. Like, I think someone has to drive, and you know, might as well be Eddie, but I don't think you'd be sending him to collect your laundry or anything.
Police say Melo spent his post-boxing days trading on the intimidation and fear his career and physique could stir up, being used as an enforcer, a loan shark, someone who could convince people to pay off debts, make deals happen, and get things done. At one point, while intervening in a conflict within a Catroni-affiliated union, Melo was accused of pulling a gun on a rival union member. The incident where he pulled the gun on someone, do you know where that led? Was he ever charged, convicted?
No, I didn't hear of any conviction out of that. I think that just made him a liability for the union. Like, all of a sudden, there's a lot of attention. You know, people like me are starting to write about it.
But my dad was very much against guns and knives and anything like that. I mean, he comes from the background of using your fists and your brain. And I don't believe that those charges were even stayed or anything else like that. I believe they were dropped.
While he may not have used them often, tales of Melo's fists made him just as feared in many underworld circles as the guns most of those characters carried.
You heard that when he punched, he really, really punched. That there's one guy he hit that he broke his jaw to the point that it wasn't, you couldn't put the two sides together again. They had to be plastic. He pulverized it.
If his role outside of boxing was intimidation, it was working. Even feared mob bosses were uncomfortable around Hurricane Melo.
There was a Hamilton mob guy, John Papalia, who was later murdered, but he supposedly said to Frank Catroni, put Melo on a leash or I'll kill him. Like he was just unnerved by Melo being in the room.
That intimidation factor led to 2 earlier attempts on Melo's life. The first in 1988.
I remember a conversation we had, and he kind of said to me, yeah, you know how it is, you know, these guys, sometimes he says, you know, and he's funny because during the conversation he said to me, you know, somebody's gonna shoot me one day. Generally, what guys get killed for is fear. Fear and jealousy are the 2 things that get you killed. And oddly enough, I think he got shot like a week later. He was shot in the leg or something by some guy that was afraid of him.
His enemies would try again soon after.
There was a big plan to kill Melo, and there was talk among the people planning about what kind of gun to use, and they actually, it was kind of odd, they were talking about how big of a gun do you need. I mean, which is, it's almost like cartoony.
And why were they trying to kill him?
Sort of the neighborhood thing again. I mean, there was, if Eddie was in the room, nobody's looking at you. A lot of guys have been under sort of second or third or fourth fiddle to Melo for a long time, so a lot of resentments build up, and it's sort of, when do I get my time?
Next on Crime Beat, could one of these individuals who tried to kill Melo before have tried again? That's after the break. Remembered as a loving father by his family, former boxing superstar Eddie Melo was only 40 years old when he was shot and killed. But by that time, his name was already known to police. Now back to Mark Carcasole with Eddie Melo's final round.
Despite 2 attempts on his life, Eddie Melo continued to associate and work with members of the mob throughout the 90s. He was one of 9 people arrested in 1995 as part of a multi-year Toronto police investigation called Project Adam, which targeted an alleged real estate fraud and money laundering operation said to be run by high-level operatives in the Toronto area's organized crime world. Among the evidence gathered by police was this photo of Melo in the company of mobster Peter Scarcella, linked to Montreal's Rizzuto crime family. The charges were eventually withdrawn when one of the investigators pleaded guilty to stealing money from the operation's budget. It wasn't the first time Melo had been arrested or seen charges dropped.
He was arrested in Cornwall, allegedly for trying to smuggle, and he was held for a while and then let go, so that really didn't go too far. He was charged with an extortion, but that didn't go too far. There's a lot of there's a lot of smoke, but there wasn't really the big fire. He never did prison time.
Well, I take full responsibility for everything that I've done as far as getting in trouble with the law, and whatever I've done, it's been before the justice system. I've paid for, I've been punished for whatever crimes I committed, was found guilty of, and that was it. A lot of people say, well, you know, you shouldn't have got in trouble. I was a fighter. A lot of people want to try you on. You don't look so big. They want to try out. It's like John Wayne. Somebody know John Wayne's the fastest guy in the West. They want to try you out.
Rhonda Sullivan, Melo's widow, and daughter Jessica Melo told Global News Eddie was a good father and denied the reputed mob enforcer was still connected with organized crime.
So do you believe that Eddie's, I guess, organized criminal past was behind him?
Yes. Yes, I do.
But a short time after this interview, police arrested the pair along with 3 other relatives. The family arrived home to find officers seizing Eddie's Jaguar, at which point police say the relatives attacked several officers from Peel Homicide and Toronto Police.
That was a nightmare. I got a phone call from, actually a page from, I can't remember, it was a reporter saying they were at our condo and they were seizing his Jaguar. And so I remember flying on the highway to get back to the condo, and this tow truck driver is hooking up the Jag and it was a mess.
At one point, a sledgehammer was produced and was swung at a number of officers.
They said a sledgehammer was produced. It wasn't, there was no sledgehammer, it was like a mallet.
5 family members were arrested and charged with obstructing police, including Melo's widow.
I can say that she's facing a charge of weapon dangerous, and there is another person charged with defensive assault.
It ended up taking, I think it was 4 or 5 officers to put me down on the ground, and they were super, super aggressive.
Eventually, charges were dropped against all family members involved.
I definitely was not in my right state of mind and just desperate, you know, like I just lost my whole world.
The car would appear again, along with a huge crowd of Eddie's friends, family, and fans at his funeral.
Eddie Melo's widow, Rhonda Sullivan, arrives at her husband's funeral, driving his blue Jaguar.
I also want to thank everybody for being here for my brother.
There is an emotionally charged feeling as the bells begin to toll, and the reputed mob enforcer's casket is carried into the church by, among others, former world-ranked boxer Nicky Furlano. And since police still have no suspects in the case, detectives inconspicuously monitor the crowd, wondering just who is paying their last respects to Melo.
There were a number of people here with criminal records and criminal past, but just no one of a substantive nature.
As 400 mourners leave the church and a huge crowd of curiosity seekers watch from across the street, Melo's widow yells a final thought to our cameras.
Proved by this turnout that Eddie was very much loved. Very much.
You know, to find out one thing, that your parent who you loved the most and who was your #1 supporter in everything that you did not only died, but then you find out that he was murdered. And then you find out that it was for someone's paycheck. And then you find out that someone ordered it. And then you find out that like the media and everything is having a field day with it. Those to me still are all different tragedies and losses that I'm still trying to process.
In the summer of 2003, police arrested 2 suspects, both charged with first-degree murder.
A second arrest has been made in the double murder of Eduardo Melo and Joao Pavao. 52-year-old Manuel da Silva was captured by Peel police. He's been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
Homicide investigators, they arrested the second party by the name of Manuel da Silva, commonly known as Mike da Silva. He was arrested at the Deer Lake Trailer Park in Huntsville, Ontario without incident.
Earlier this summer, police arrested this man, Charles Gagne, and charged him with 2 counts of murder. Police say da Silva paid Charles Gagne to kill Eduardo Melo, a former middleweight boxing champ and a reputed mob enforcer. Pavao was not contracted to be killed. He was, however, friends with Melo, and according to police, chose the wrong day to meet up with his friend.
A few weeks later, a third man, Delio Pereira, was also arrested. He and Gagne, who was already on parole at a halfway house in Ottawa, were the ones accused of being involved in the actual murder.
He was out on a day pass. He was supposed to be doing a 10-year stint for an armed robbery with a loaded AK-47, and he was granted a day pass to go and visit this aunt, which nobody checked up on. He never checked in. Drove down to the city, to Toronto. This was the day, and they knew, you know, where my dad was gonna be.
It was small plaza, small coffee shop. Not that far from where Melo lived. Melo had concert tickets for that night, and so he wasn't going to be staying there that long. A big question would be, how did they know Melo was going to be there?
Coming up, the details of what happened that fateful day in the parking lot. After years of waiting, 3 suspects have been arrested in connection to the murders of Eddie Melo and his friend Johnny Pavao, including the suspected shooter Charles Gagne. details are finally emerging about what happened that fateful day. Now back to Mark Carcasole with Eddie Melo's final round.
Gagné had, removed all of his body hair prior to this, and had his hoodie up real tight, and they watched as they saw my dad leaving Amicis and sitting in his Grand Jeep Cherokee in the parking lot, and Johnny was standing there talking to my dad, and he shot Johnny first.
He killed Melo's friend because he was a witness, and he was able to get Melo before Melo could punch him out. If Melo had started swinging at him and the guy wasn't shooting, then it would have gone a different way.
When he shot my dad, the first bullet did not kill my dad. He shot him in the head.
While court documents say both men died instantly, Jessica recalls some witnesses describing it differently.
People heard his engine rev, so he must have not, gone and put his foot on the brake to throw it in reverse, or I don't know what. And quickly, another one came out of that 22 and ricocheted and eventually, obviously, killed my dad. When Gagné looked for Delio, he had gone, took off, and so Gagné had no choice but to hijack this poor man in his red Honda Civic at gunpoint. He disposed of the gun in the Humber River and went to Sherway, got rid of all his clothes, went back to the halfway house as if nothing happened.
The alleged initial plan to kill Melo was even more callous.
The same hitman, Charles Gagné, that was at Melo's son's daycare. And so the person actually was scouting the daycare, which, how do you know where Eddie Melo's kid's going to daycare? Like, you've got someone in the inner circle is tipping you off.
Someone was giving him those details.
It also points to the extreme cruelty. I mean, if that one had been carried out, then all of these little kids would have seen the dad of one of their friends get murdered right in front of them.
Including his own son.
Yeah, I mean, what does that do to somebody?
Delio Pereira and Charles Gagné both pleaded guilty. Pereira to charges of accessory to and conspiracy to commit murder, serving 4.5 years. Gagné struck a deal with the Crown that saw him plead guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder, claiming Melo was set up and that he was paid to kill Melo.
I don't know all the inner dealings of, my dad's network or, things with regards to who owed him money and everything like that, but I do know that, that day he was called there because he went to go collect money that was owed to him.
It's safe to say Melo went there to talk to the guy about when do I get my 20,000. I mean, I believe that, and that's a good reason to draw Melo in, say I want to talk to you about that money, I want to give you a bit of it now, that sort of thing. You're guaranteed Melo, then that has to get to Charles Gagné.
Gagné was sentenced to life with no parole eligibility for 12 years. His plea deal implicated and led to the arrest of Mike, or Manny, De Silva, who had known Melo for years. Gagné claimed De Silva paid him to kill Melo.
Was this a matter of perhaps investigators not doing their job properly, or maybe the Crown not doing so, or was he outright framed?
Well, he was outright framed. In other words, I don't think that the investigation of this was really an investigation that led to Gagné. That's where there was really quite innovative and interesting police work, because it was virtually a cold case after almost 3 years. And because of the arrest of certain people who were associated with Mr. Gagné, it was through their evidence and the deal making with those people who were involved in criminal careers that led to the arrest of Mr. Gagné. After Mr. Gagné's arrest, what really happens is, the deal-making function of Mr. Gagné's lawyer engaged with the prosecutor at that time, who come to a resolution. But the key to that result is that Mr. Gagné will, and I put this in quotes, truthfully identify the person who had hired him, so that person could be prosecuted as being the person truly responsible for Mr. Melo's death. It was determined by the police and by the prosecution that they accepted Mr. Gagne's version of events in pointing to Mr. De Silva.
De Silva was eventually acquitted. Even Melo's own family wasn't convinced that he put out the hit on Eddie. They feel the Crown bought into a blatant lie from Gagne.
He took the sweetheart deal with Steve Sheriff, which, you know, the mutual friend helped facilitate, which was kind of boggling for us because, you know, you're supposed to be a friend of my dad's, and yet, you know, you're helping this person out, but you're saying that, well, it's the only way that, you know, he will admit to it and testify and everything else like that. So, yeah, that's always been very interesting.
Crown Prosecutor Steve Sheriff declined an interview, but it's clear there's no love lost toward the Melo family on his side. In an email, he writes, "I have had enough of that family to last several retirements. Why should I be the target once again of their continued resentment when we overcame such formidable obstacles and exerted extreme effort to do the case? They choose to forget we convicted the killer who remains in jail. It was not easy. The police and I are proud of what we did for society." On the other side of the courtroom, De Silva's lawyer, Brian Greenspan, also suggested that the mutual friend who helped set up Gagne's plea deal might have really been the person who paid him to kill Melo. Even cross-examined him in court.
We directly confronted him with the idea that he in fact was responsible for the homicide. Obviously Mr. Gagne denied that, and the person who was the alternate suspect also denied it, but obviously our position was he was the more likely candidate. He was the one who we thought both had a motive, but more importantly, the relationship between Mr. Gagne and the alternate suspect was one that was really deep-seated. This person was Mr. Gagne's friend, mentor, confidant, supporter, and we established that Mr. Gagne would be totally loyal to him. And it was that person who had the true animosity and hostility toward Mr. De Silva. I think, in fairness, we thought we had evidence of that hostility toward Mr. Melo.
We got in touch with the mutual friend, who we've chosen not to identify because he was never charged. He declined an on-camera interview with us, but strongly defended himself against the accusations over the phone.
I took the stand. I spoke to the cops, told them everything I knew that I knew, and that was the end of the story. People think that I was involved. Well, that's their problem, not mine. I've actually helped Eddie's situation by taking the stand. I helped the cops with whatever they did. Those people cooperated with the cops because of me. Mm-hmm. So that's the story.
No one has ever been convicted of setting Melo up.
Is it possible for there to ever be a day when the person who hired Gagne is brought to justice, the true person?
Unlikely. You know, perhaps a deathbed confession to clear their conscience.
Without having that person behind bars, one question investigators and Melo's family never got an answer to is why.
This was not anything to do with mob, mafia, bikers, gangs. It was not anything organized crime related. What it boils down to, and this has followed my dad throughout his entire life, is the jealousy. The jealousy of my dad's success in and out of the ring. It doesn't just end with Gagne. And there's a lot of questions out there that are still left unanswered.
But in the 20 years since, the victims' families have spent plenty of time dealing with the man who pulled the trigger, repeatedly writing victim impact statements to the parole board and attending hearings where Charles Gagne has variously requested supervised and unescorted day passes.
You know, I got a call yesterday and, you know, he's applying for now day parole. And he just recently got denied for 2 72-hour unescorted temporary absences.
Because of Gagne, we're dragged into dealing with this every couple of months, reliving it, rehearing the sequence of events, what he thinks about it, what he wants.
One of his supporters in one of those hearings, Crown Prosecutor Steve Sheriff. In a 2017 article, Peter Edwards reported on what he'd witnessed, writing that Sheriff testified, quote, "I expected a grade A psychopath. I know the breed. I became his friend. Who would believe that?" When we asked Sheriff about it, his response was simply to point out that he only supported Gagne once. In 2019, Gagne was actually granted multiple supervised day passes to do community service. In August 2021, Gagne was denied a request for unescorted day passes to the Greater Toronto area, where he wanted to visit his wife, whom he'd met online, and his adult daughter.
And there is absolutely no remorse there. He talks about how he wants to get out so that he can see his daughter. And he took away my dad, who never gets to see his daughters.
Coming up, their father's lesser-known fight, fought in his final years of life. Charles Gagne pleaded guilty and is serving time for murdering 40-year-old former boxer Eddie Melo. But he says he was hired to do it. The man he accused was acquitted, and no one else was ever charged for putting a hit on Melo's life. As the years pass, Melo's family has had to come to terms with the fact they may never know the full story. Here's Mark Carcasole with the conclusion of Eddie Melo's final round.
Remember this card that they did?
Yes, his boxing trading card. This was a hot commodity. You can't even get these anymore because I tried.
With their dad gone, all Eddie Melo's family has left of him is pictures, memorabilia, and memories. Outside of victim impact statements, his daughter Elise has never spoken about it publicly.
It's completely changed every single aspect of my life. The main reason why I haven't spoken out about anything is purely because of fear. Because at 14, I saw how everyone reacted. Suddenly, I'm labeled as Eddie Melo's youngest daughter, and that's all anyone would kind of ever see. So I've really, up until today, spent my life hiding from that and protecting my relationship with my dad and what I knew with him.
The very newspaper headlines describing her dad's death were used as weapons against her.
Kids had plastered all of those newspaper articles on my locker. And so I'm seeing the crime scene in a newspaper article. I'm seeing tarps and things covered, and I had to switch schools and go under my mom's maiden name. And if they asked about my dad, I would talk about him as though he was still alive, but just that he was living in Toronto. When all of this happened and I was 14, I begged my studio owners to allow me to stay at the dance studio 6 days a week from the moment it opened until it closed, and still to this day, it's my therapy.
Melo's older daughter, Jessica, copes by giving back to youth with the gift of the sport that was once such a big part of her dad's life. Enter the Eddie Melo Legacy Organization.
I always knew that I wanted to do something to honor my dad. And then I knew it had to do with boxing. And if I could attach my dad's name and his legacy, and you know, the gym was a big thing that saved him, you know, from being a little street punk or something like that, right? Growing up in like Little Portugal and stuff like that, there's and you know, the oldest of 5 kids, immigrants as parents, like there wasn't a ton of opportunities, right? Everybody that is involved in it, I feel, is an extension of my dad's legacy and a voice for him and a voice for themselves. It's been a really great experience, I think, a healing thing for me to get to connect with these kids and you know, let them know who my dad was. I've got a great assembly of, you know, former world champs and Olympians and everything that are available as, you know, mentors. The biggest ones that I always love to have too is George Chavello. You know, he's a huge advocate for anti-suicide and anti-drug initiatives.
In his last few years of life, Eddie had another fight on his card, efforts to deport him back to Portugal.
When did you first find out that you were not a Canadian citizen? When was it made aware to you?
Well, just about two years ago, when I got involved with a charge that they looked into it, but the police, I was in trouble when I was 17 years old. They never told me nothing about immigration, never came and gave me a hard time. Just now that they gave me a hard time.
You know, he worked. I mean, he did have some jobs when he was younger and, you know, had a social insurance number and everything like that.
I assumed it was never a reason to ask if I was a Canadian citizen or not. I mean, I fought for the Canadian title, I didn't fight for the Portuguese title. I mean, I just assumed I was until later on. And
when you were fighting for the Canadian title, did anybody say you're going to get this Canadian title, you have to be a Canadian citizen?
No, I didn't. Because I was fighting for the title. I was here in Canada, and I consider myself as much Canadian as anybody else.
It wasn't until he got into a bar fight and everything and was facing some charges that he realized, well, I'm not a Canadian citizen. But, you know, when he was at the peak of his career and this great athlete and everything, there was never an issue.
Court documents from March of 2000 show that deportation order had been stayed as long as Eddie kept the peace. In a way, though, Jessica says she almost wishes he was deported. He might still be alive. He was only 40 then. He'd be 60 now. He's in great health. He'd still be around. What do you think he'd be doing today?
I think he would be over the moon being a vavoo, a grandfather to my kids. I think he would be enjoying his life and just being present and productive and being there for me and my sister and like our family and my family the way that he was when he was here. My dad was my everything. And I never got to say goodbye to him. I told my dad every day that I loved him and you know, I don't have any regrets in that sense, but I wish that I could have had more time. And despite what some people may read or whatever, he was simply that, a human being.
He was a family man at the core. So like I said, I talked to him 3 times a day before I went to school, when I was home from school, and then when I was home from dance. He was such a special dad that, you know, my sister was his firstborn, but I was his little girl. So he made each of us feel so special and so supportive that it's devastating to think that he's lost the time to be able to do that with us as we grow through life. So he'd be with us, whatever our family was getting up to, he'd be there.
As Eddie Melo's family continues to honor his memory, his killer, Charles Gagné, continues his fight for more freedoms. Once again, applying for an unescorted temporary pass and day parole, this time in Toronto. Members of Eddie Melo's family say they will be in attendance once again to speak out against it, in hopes of keeping Gagné behind bars for the rest of his life. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, check out our YouTube page or download the Global Go app to watch on your phone.